Every year, my husband's family dropped all their kids with me while they went to their annual reunion. I was never invited. This year I hired a babysitter and followed them, and what I found wasn't a reunion at all. Posted to r/true off my chest. There is a specific kind of foolishness that is almost indistinguishable from trust. You perform it in the same way, with the same open face and the same willingness to believe the explanation you are given. The difference only becomes clear in retrospect, when you look back at the years of believing and realize that trust had been answered not with honesty, but with increasingly practiced management of what you were allowed to know. I was trusting for 4 years. I would like to say I was foolish for less than that, but the honest answer is that I was trusting and foolish for the same amount of time, and the gap between them closed all at once on a Saturday afternoon in September, when I sat in my car in a parking lot and watched my husband's entire family walk into a building that was not a reunion venue, had never been a reunion venue, and would not have fooled me for a single second if I had ever been allowed to see it. My name is Adriana Reyes. I am 34 years old. I have been married to a man named Gabriel for 6 years. I have spent 4 of those 6 years as the designated childcare solution for an annual event that I was told, year after year, was a Reyes family reunion, a private, long-standing tradition that predated my marriage and that the family conducted among themselves every September, usually over a long weekend, at a location that was always described as a rented property outside of a city. I was never invited. I was invited to babysit. Let me explain. The Reyes family is large. Gabriel has 2 brothers, older brother Marco, who is 38, and younger brother Daniel, who is 30. He has 2 sisters, Renata, who is 36, and Sofia, who is 28. His parents, Eduardo and Carmen, are in their early 60s and serve as the gravitational center of the family in a way that certain parents do, the ones around whom everything orbits, whose approval shapes the behavior of their adult children in ways those children have not fully examined. Between Marco, Renata, Daniel, and Sofia, there are currently 8 children ranging in age from 3 to 11. When the tradition began 4 years ago, there were 6 children. The number has grown. The tradition has not changed. The tradition works like this. On the last weekend of September every year, the entire extended family gathers. Gabriel, his parents, his siblings, and their spouses all go to the reunion. I, the only daughter-in-law, or one of them, stay behind with all of the children. All 8 of them. For the full weekend, Friday evening through Sunday afternoon. I should note that Sophia's husband also stays behind. His name is Kevin, and he is a quiet man who I have always liked and who has, in my understanding, been navigating the same arrangement from his side of it. Kevin and I have spent 3 September weekends managing 8 children between 2 adults in the Reyes family home, and we have become, as a result, reasonably close in the particular way that people become close when they have shared a foxhole. The first year, I accepted the arrangement without much interrogation. Gabriel explained it as a long-standing family tradition. The adults, meaning the blood relatives, used the weekend for things that had been established before either Kevin or I came into the family, and the children needed consistent care, and could I help with that?
He said it warmly.
He said the family appreciated it. His mother Carmen called me before the weekend and said she was so grateful I was willing to support the family this way, and she said it in the specific register that makes declining feel impossible. I stayed home. I cared for the children. I made the best of it. The second year, I asked Gabriel if I could come along, or if Kevin and I could arrange alternative childcare so we could both attend. He said the reunion was specifically for blood family. It was a tradition that his parents felt strongly about, and he did not want to push against it. He said he hoped I understood.
He said he would make it up to me.
I stayed home. I cared for the children. The third year, I raised it again more directly. I said I felt excluded. I said that after 3 years of marriage, I found it strange that I was not considered family for the purposes of a family reunion. Gabriel said he had raised it with his parents, and they had explained that it was simply the way things had always been done, and they were not comfortable changing it. He said he was sorry. He said he was caught between his parents and me. He said he loved me. I stayed home. I cared for the children. The fourth year, I hired a babysitter. I want to tell you how I arrived at that decision because it did not happen suddenly, and because the reasons for it were more complicated than simply wanting to catch someone in something. I was not at the start of September of that year, operating with the hypothesis that something was wrong. I was operating with the slow accumulation of a feeling that I could not name precisely, but that had been building for years and had started to become impossible to metabolize through the explanations I had been given. The feeling was this: I did not believe the story anymore. Not because I had a specific reason not to. I had no evidence of anything other than what I had been told. But I had spent 4 years in this family paying attention in the way you pay attention when you are always slightly on the outside of something, and certain details had accumulated in a way that would not stay arranged into the innocent configuration they were supposed to form. For example, in a large and demonstrative family that shared photographs of almost everything, birthdays, holidays, ordinary Sunday dinners, there were no photographs from the annual reunion. None. Not on anyone's social media, not in the family group chat, not shown to me afterward. When I had asked about this, the explanations varied. Carmen said they tried to be present rather than documenting. Renata said they kept the reunion private intentionally. Gabriel said it was just not that kind of gathering. Each explanation was individually plausible. Together they formed a pattern of conspicuous absence. For example, the location of the reunion was never specific. It was outside the city, or about 2 hours out, or the same place as before. No address was ever mentioned in my hearing. When I once asked Gabriel directly where they stayed, he named a town that, when I looked it up later, did not have the kind of rental property he had described. When I mentioned this to him, he said he must have misremembered the name. For example, Kevin, who stayed home with me every year, had once said something in passing during our 3rd September weekend together, something small, quickly recovered from, that told me he had questions too. He said, "Do you ever think about what they actually do up there?" And then he laughed and said, "Never mind," and went back to monitoring the children on the back porch. But he had said it, and I had filed it. I did not plan the babysitter decision far in advance. It came to me about 3 weeks before the September weekend, in the specific way that decisions arrive when you have been circling them for a long time, all at once, clearly, with a calm that surprised me. I would arrange childcare. I would follow them. I did not tell Kevin. I did not tell anyone. I told Gabriel that I had made alternative arrangements for the children so that I could have a weekend to myself, and that I hoped he had a good time at the reunion. His response was careful in a way that I noted and filed. Not warm, not cold, just careful. He said okay. He said he hoped I had a restful weekend. He kissed me goodbye on Friday afternoon and got into Marco's car with Eduardo, Carmen, Renata, and Daniel, and they drove away. I had already hired Maria, who was a professional babysitter Kevin had used before and who was fully capable of managing 8 children without assistance. Kevin, when I told him I would be handling the childcare differently this year and that Maria would be there, looked at me with an expression I can only describe as knowing without knowing the specific thing he was being knowing about. He said, "Good for you." He did not ask questions. I got in my car. Following a caravan of family members without being detected is less cinematic than it sounds and more anxiety-inducing than I had anticipated. I hung back far enough to avoid being obvious, close enough to not lose them at turns. I had Gabriel's location sharing on my phone. We shared locations as a default, the way many couples do, and he had either forgotten this or had not thought it would matter. I watched the Blued move through the city and onto the highway, and then off an exit about 40 minutes from our house, which was significantly less than 2 hours out. The convoy pulled into a parking lot. I parked across the street and slightly down the block, in a position where I could see the entrance without being immediately visible from it. I watched the family unload from 2 cars. I watched Carmen straighten her jacket. I watched Eduardo say something that made Marco laugh. I watched Renata and Sofia walk together, close in the way of sisters, talking with the ease of people arriving somewhere familiar. I watched them walk through the front door of an event venue, not a rural rental property, not a family retreat space, but a mid-sized private event venue in a suburb 40 minutes from our home, the kind that hosts corporate parties and milestone celebrations. It had a sign outside. The sign, which I photographed from across the street, said, "Reyes Family Gathering, Private Event." I sat in my car for approximately 5 minutes. Then I called Kevin. I know that the call to Kevin is the moment in the story where some people will think I should have called Gabriel instead, or that I should have simply walked in, or that I should have waited and processed before doing anything. I have thought about all of those options, and I understand why each of them makes sense from the outside. What I can tell you from the inside is that in that moment I needed to speak to the one other person who had been sitting outside this thing with me, who had spent 3 September weekends managing 8 children while the family did something none of us were supposed to know about, and who had once asked, "Do you ever think about what they actually do up there?" and then laughed it off. Kevin answered on the second ring. I said, "Kevin, I need to tell you something, and I need you not to react loudly, because Maria and the kids might hear you." He said, "Okay." I told him where I was. I told him what I was looking at. I sent him the photograph of the sign.
He was quiet for a long time.
Not the stunned quiet of someone receiving something entirely surprising. The quiet of someone receiving confirmation of something they had suspected, but had not known how to name. He said, "How long has this been going on?" I said, "As long as we've been left behind." He said a word that I will not reproduce here, but that conveyed his feelings with admirable economy. I said, "What do you want to do?" He said, "I want to know what's in that building." I walked in. I want to be clear that I did not storm in, did not make a scene in the parking lot, did not call Gabriel to announce my arrival. I walked in calmly, as if I had every right to be there, because I was a member of this family, and I did have every right to be there, and the only reason I had not been there in previous years was that no one had told me this was where there was to be. The venue had a lobby area with a reception desk and a set of double doors leading to a main event space. A young woman at the desk looked up when I entered. I said I was here for the Reyes family gathering. She said of course, and gestured toward the double doors. I walked through them. What I found was not what I had constructed in my mind during the 40 minutes of following and the 5 minutes of sitting in the car processing the sign. My imagination in that window of time had gone to dark places, the places your imagination goes when you have been excluded from something for 4 years and you do not know why. I had constructed scenarios. None of them were what I walked into. What I walked into was a party. A birthday party. Specifically, a 60th birthday party for Eduardo, my father-in-law, complete with a DJ setup in the corner, a long buffet table, round tables with centerpieces, a slideshow running on a screen at the front of the room showing photographs spanning Eduardo's life, and approximately 60 people who appeared to be family, friends, and colleagues of the guest of honor. It was in full and cheerful swing. The Reyes family members I had followed were distributed around the room, talking and laughing and holding drinks. Gabriel saw me from across the room. I watched the color leave his face in real time. I want to describe the next 3 minutes as accurately as I can. He crossed the room quickly. He was smiling the smile of someone who is trying to smile and whose face is not fully cooperating with the project. He said in a low voice, "Adriana, what are you? How did you?" I said, "Happy birthday party for Eduardo." He said, "I can explain." I said, "I know you can. I would like you to." He looked around. His mother had noticed me and was making her way across the room. Several other family members had clocked my arrival and were watching with the carefully casual attention of people trying not to appear to be watching. Carmen reached us. She took my hand and said my name warmly and said she was so glad I could make it, as if I had been invited, as if I had always been expected, as if the previous 4 years had not happened in exactly the way they had. I looked at her for a moment and I said, "Carmen, I think Gabriel was about to explain something to me. Would you give us a minute?" She looked at Gabriel. Something passed between them, a specific look that I had seen before in the family and that I now understood differently than I had before. She said of course and stepped back. Gabriel and I moved to a quieter corner of the room. The explanation took about 20 minutes and it was, in the end, less dramatic and more depressing than the scenarios I had imagined in the car. Here is what had been happening. Eduardo's 60th birthday was a milestone the family had decided to celebrate annually. Not his birthday specifically, but what they had come to call a family gathering, which was in reality a private party organized by Carmen for Eduardo, attended by their social circle as well as family, featuring elements that Carmen and Eduardo had decided they did not want their children's spouses to be part of. Not because they disliked the spouses. But because Carmen, and this is the part that took the longest to extract from Gabriel in the corner of that room, Carmen had a specific vision of the gathering as something belonging to the Reyes family of origin, and she had made the decision, without consulting anyone else, that spouses were not part of that original family. The child care arrangement had been, in Carmen's conception, a way of ensuring that her grandchildren were cared for by people she trusted while the gathering was happening, and she had apparently genuinely believed, or convinced herself to believe, that this was a reasonable and mutually acceptable arrangement. That staying home to care for 8 children while 60 people attended a party was a fair and appropriate role for the daughters-in-law and sons-in-law to occupy. I want to pause here and tell you the thing that hit me hardest in that corner conversation, harder than the exclusion itself, and harder than the 4 years of misdirection. Gabriel had known. He had known the whole time. He had known it was a party, not a reunion. He had known I was being excluded from a specific event rather than from a long-standing family tradition. He had delivered the explanations, that this is how the family has always done things, the Carmen is not comfortable changing it, I'm caught between you and my parents, knowing they were not the full truth. I looked at him while he was explaining, and I thought about those 3 September weekends I had spent managing 8 children in a family home while my husband attended a party for his father 40 minutes away. I thought about the specific loneliness of being the person who stays behind while the family goes somewhere. I thought about the careful, practiced management of my understanding that he had participated in for 4 years. I said, "You lied to me." He said, "I didn't tell you the full truth." I said, "Gabriel, those are the same thing." He did not have an answer to that. I did not make a scene at the party. I want to be clear about that because I think people reading this might expect one, and might even feel that one was deserved, and I have thought about it, and I believe that the version of me who walked through those double doors and into a room full of 60 people who had been attending an event I was excluded from for 4 years without being told, that version of me actually behaved with more composure than I was aware of managing. I stayed for approximately 40 minutes. I spoke to Eduardo and said happy birthday with sincerity because I have always been fond of Eduardo, who is a more straightforward person than his wife and who, when he saw me, had the decency to look genuinely uncomfortable rather than performing delight at my arrival. I spoke to Renata, who said very little. I spoke to Daniel, who said he was glad I was there. I accepted a drink from a passing server. I looked at the slideshow of Eduardo's life and found, among the photographs, several from previous years of this gathering, including one from last year in which Gabriel was clearly visible, laughing, at a table with his siblings and his parents. I put that image in my memory where it will probably live for a long time. And then I said goodbye to Eduardo and Carmen, and I walked back through the double doors and through the lobby and out to the parking lot, and I sat in my car and called Kevin again. He answered immediately. I told him everything. He was quiet through most of it, processing. At the end he said, "What do you need right now?" I said, "I need to go home and think." He said, "Do you want me to stay until you get there?" I said yes. He was there when I got home. The children were in good hands with Maria. Kevin and I sat on the back porch where we had spent 3 September weekends doing the work that our spouses had been relieved of, and we talked for 2 hours. Not about strategy or next steps. Just about what had happened and what it meant, and how strange it was to have the answer finally, and to find that it was not the answer either of us had imagined constructing in our separate imaginations over the years. Kevin said something near the end of our conversation that I have thought about since. He said, "The thing that bothers me most is that they thought we'd just keep accepting it. That we'd keep showing up every year with the kids and not ask questions. They had a very low opinion of our curiosity." I said, "Or a very high opinion of our willingness to be managed." He said, "Same thing, probably."
Gabriel came home late that night.
I was still awake. We sat in the kitchen and had the conversation that needed to be had, which took 3 hours and covered more territory than I am going to reproduce here because much of it is private and much of it is still unresolved and much of it is ongoing rather than historical. The parts one will tell you. Gabriel said that he had not told me the truth about the gathering because Carmen had explicitly asked him not to. She had been concerned. She had told him years ago that if I knew it was a party I would want to attend and that my attendance would change the dynamic she wanted. Gabriel had agreed to go along with this because, And this is the part he struggled to say, but eventually did, because going along with what Carmen wanted was the default he had operated in for his entire life, and because he had not understood or had not wanted to understand the cost that default was having on me. I said, "You let your mother manage me for 4 years." He said, "Yes." I said, "And you let me sit home with 8 children while you went to a party." He said, "Yes." I said, "Why?"
He was quiet for a long time.
And then he said, "Because it was easier than the conversation I would have had to have with my mother if I insisted you were included. And I'm telling you that now, knowing it is one of the worst things I've done in our marriage, and I'm not asking you to be okay with it. I'm just telling you the truth because you deserve that, and I should have given it to you 4 years ago." I said, "4 years ago would have been better." He said, "I know." We went to bed without resolving anything because there was nothing to resolve that night, because the resolution of something like that is not a single conversation but a long and uncertain process. But we had spoken honestly, which was more than we had managed in the years preceding, and I held that as the beginning of something, even if I was not yet sure what. Carmen called me the following day. I had expected this call, and I had thought about what I wanted from it before it came. She was warm in the way she is always warm, the register that makes disagreement feel like churlishness. She said she was so glad I had come to the party. She said she hoped I understood that the arrangement had been made with good intentions. She said she hoped it had not upset me. She used the word upset in the way people use it when they want to minimize the scale of the thing that has been done, not hurt, not deceived, not excluded and misled for 4 years, but upset, which implies something passing and personal rather than something structural and sustained. I said, "Carmen, I'd like to have a real conversation about this because I think we need one. But I don't think I can have it today." She said, "Of course." She said, "Whenever I was ready." I said, "I also want you to understand something clearly. What happened wasn't just about a party. It was about 4 years of being managed instead of talked to, and I need you to understand that I understand that, even if we haven't had the full conversation yet." She was quiet in a way that was different from her usual quiet, less managed, more genuinely uncertain. She said she heard me. I said, "Good. I'll be in touch." The full conversation with Carmen happened 2 weeks later, with Gabriel present, in a session that my therapist, Dr. Lorena Castillo, had suggested and helped structure. It was not easy. Carmen is a woman who has arranged the world around her preferences for a long time and who is not practiced at being told that her arrangements have had costs for other people. But she engaged. She said things that were harder than I expected from her, including, at one point, that she had known the arrangement was unfair and had told herself it was temporary, and that temporary had become for years, and she was sorry. She said sorry in the particular way of a woman who is accustomed to being the family's emotional authority and who finds it genuinely uncomfortable to be on the receiving end of accountability rather than the dispensing end. But she said it. It was not enough on its own. It was a beginning. Kevin, separately, had his own version of this reckoning with Sophia. I will not tell his story because it is his, but I will tell you that by the following month the two of us had arrived at similar places by different paths, and that when we talked about it on one of our back porch evenings, which have continued, now chosen rather than assigned, we found that the resolution and the unresolved parts looked similar from both sides of the situation. He said, "What changed for me was understanding that I had made myself very easy to manage. That I had been so low maintenance about the whole thing that it never cost anyone anything to keep doing it." I said, "Yes, I think about that a lot." He said, "The babysitter was a good idea." I said, "It was $40 an hour, and it was the best money I have spent in several years."
He laughed.
It was the kind of laugh that contains real relief. My marriage is, as I write this, intact and in process. I say that without the word recovered because I don't think recovered is accurate yet, and I think accuracy is what this story has been about from the beginning. Gabriel and I are in couples therapy with Dr. Castillo. We are doing the work that the previous 4 years of managed non-communication had deferred, which is at times uncomfortable and at times surprisingly good, and which I am choosing to believe is building something more honest than what we had before. The September weekend this year looked different. There was no gathering, Carmen had decided, after the conversation and after the events of the previous September, that the format needed to change. There was a birthday dinner for Eduardo, held at a restaurant, to which everyone was invited. Kevin and I sat at the table for the first time in 4 years, and were served the same food as everyone else, and it was, in the way of things that are actually quite simple, but that have been complicated for a long time, entirely fine. Eduardo sat next to me for part of the dinner and told me stories about his childhood that I had never heard because I had never sat next to him at the family dinner before. I liked the stories. I told him so. Carmen, across the table, watched this interaction with an expression I have thought about since. Not guilt, not pride, not the managed warmth she usually deploys. Something more honest than all of those. Something that might have been, if I am being generous in my reading of it, the expression of a woman who is beginning to understand what she had been preventing. I want to close this the way I try to close most hard things, with what I actually learned rather than with what sounds like a satisfying conclusion. What I learned is that being easy to manage is not the same as being agreeable. I had told myself for years that I was being patient, being understanding, giving the family grace around a tradition I didn't fully understand. What I was actually doing was making myself available for an arrangement that served everyone except me, and I was doing it because pushing back had a cost, and I kept deciding the cost was too high. The cost of not pushing back for 4 years was also high. It just distributed differently. It distributed invisibly, in the slow erosion of feeling like a full member of a family I had married into, in 3 September weekends of being the childcare solution while a party happened 40 minutes away, in the particular specific loneliness of being managed by the people who are supposed to love you. I drove to that parking lot because I needed to know the truth. I walked through those double doors because knowing the truth without acting on it would have been its own form of compliance. I sat on the back porch with Kevin because some truths are easier to hold when someone else is holding them too. The babysitter cost $40 an hour. What it bought was the beginning of being seen.